First, thank you so much for inviting us to talk about BOS urban architecture. We really appreciate it. We benefited a lot from conversations with all of you over the years. We've been in business for 10 years, which is amazing. So we're here to share the work of these past 10 years and all the lessons learned, or some of the lessons learned along the way, which I'm sure resonates with a lot of the small practices here in Boston. So this is coming up is a photo of we can't work this. Wow, it's not working.
This is now, that'll work.
There we go. Boom. So this is our office that we're in right now. We are in Cambridge. Again, we founded this in 2014. So up to that point, we, like Kyle said, both work at small firms and large firms. Paxton was former Brian Healy, UN Studio, OMA alum, and I worked at Merge at Util Sasaki before starting both. Again, we're both educators, kind of repeating what Kyle said. When we think about our ideas in practice, they kind of function like this sort of like feedback loops, where we pull from that experience of working with amazing people. And we also pull from all these academic endeavors and interests that we have, and they kind of intertwine, right? So these ideas span from affordability, adaptability, and resilience, promoting well-being in space, materiality, form, and creating value, really, for our clients. When we set up shop, we started to explore a business model that took advantage of working with larger firms or collaborating with larger firms to be able to sort of support the work that was coming up in Boston to fuel this sort of small design projects and to build our practice. And we're always pivot this on a kind of foundation of working in the academic world.
So we'll transition to talking a little bit about the OMA collaborations, just because it's so foundational to how we started our firm. So in 2012 to 2014, I worked for OMA running the Final Forum project in Miami Beach, which ultimately led to BOS being hired as a design and construction consultant for multiple projects. So at this point, we're kind of still in the sphere of OMA. We're kind of trying to break out of this circle a little bit to not be so tied. And that's a little bit of a small firm discussion later in terms of how we break away from that. Financially, it also is very beneficial to be in that sphere, but once we broke out, it's more autonomy and we actually have a little bit more time to do other things. So that's part of our larger discussion. But we initially started the office through the continuity of, like I mentioned before, completing the Final Forum. And then we assisted in the design, development, and construction of the Albright Knox Museum in Buffalo. And I thought we'd talk a little bit about those two projects just for everyone here, just to kind of run through some of the, let's say, the thinking of those two projects. I think it's kind of fun to see how they were kind of developed. So we thought we'd share this kind of collaborative work, and the presentation is going to oscillate between kind of this very large scale collaborations and very small scale local work. So here's the site of the Final Forum where we kind of observe the scale of the zoning of the Indian Creek side, which is on the left, which is generally low at residential scale, and then the Atlantic Ocean side on the right, which generally high rises facing the ocean. And we observe Collins Avenue, which is kind of bifurcating right down the middle of this slide. Being kind of a very large thoroughfare, kind of splitting east and west for this project. And the site was on the Indian Creek side, which you see here in this model. The first observations was the massing on that side was lower scale, residential scale, and we had a 5-story maximum height limit. It was historically, we had one site was empty, which is where you see the red and the wood. The middle site is a historically protected hotel. It's like an Art Deco hotel. It wasn't really that nice, but it's still historically protected. And the third, the Silver Cube, was eventually a new parking structure. But this kind of box of chocolate model representing massing strategies was pretty integral to both the programmatic, but also the massing and kind of formal resolution of the project. And so in consideration of the context, program, site, and scale, we developed a figure ground diagram that related to many different contexts. And also informing the massing was a consideration of the district itself and how they had all worked together across Collins Avenue, even though it was quite busy. We wanted some formal relationship between the two. On the east, there was the Saxony Hotel, the Fina House by Norman Foster. On the west was the 3 OMA buildings, which is the Forum, the Historic Hotel, and the parking structure. And we kind of thought of these as like a Pangea super continent, kind of somehow related, but separate and separated by that large kind of avenue. And so here's our final kind of figure ground that translated into the massing. A secondary consideration, which is no surprise for those that know OMA's work, is kind of program, and the program was central to thinking of developing the massing. So in the end, those two cubes in a box of chocolate model end up being a cylinder and a cube. The cube ended up being one venue, the cylinder another venue, but when they came together, it became a singular larger venue on the one floor that they intersected. So this helped the programmatic idea of kind of the pragmatic programmatic idea, how the client needed to hold simultaneous events sometimes and singular events on other times. So these two volumes have specific plan identity that then could be separated to get or together depending on the event size. And so we did this kind of diagram showing in section, A, B is on top, which is a singular event, A plus B, A and B in the middle is kind of two different events with the different pre-functions, and A, B, and C is we actually use the allowance pre-function for a third space, and there's actually a D, which is underneath the cantilever, which I'll show you a little bit later. So there's three simultaneous events. So here's a section of that composite space of the cube and cylinder with the dome. Kind of notice some of the datums here, the kind of large cantilever on Collins Avenue, which is on the right. The green line is kind of our flooding datum, which is a very real issue in Miami Beach. So almost all the services are started on the second floor. So kind of entering from below to above was critical in terms of sea level rise in that particular area of Miami Beach. And these are just 1/4-inch working models that we use to kind of think and confirm some of those details. Like I mentioned, one of the urbanistic moves was removing kind of the bottom of the cylinder to expand the sidewalk on Collins Avenue into, let's say, a shaded region as part of an urban kind of gesture for the building. Of course, you have a little model that kind of shows this, but by removing that, it kind of created our own structural issues. So now the cube itself is now holding the cylinder up on one side, which basically lent itself to kind of joining and merging the two volumes on one side versus having autonomy on the other. So if you come from the north, it looks like a singular building. Come from the south, it looks like two buildings. In addition, even though we lost some area on the front, we gained some on the back. We were able to cantilever over the Indian Creek, set back up to 20 feet on the 4th and 5th floor. So that kind of gave us this ruled surface on the backside to gain a little bit more space. And here's our ultimate massing diagram, which was, like I said, a singular coming from the north and two buildings from the south. So it's kind of maintain the scale of that box of chocolate, where the site almost feels like two buildings coming from one direction and one from another. And this is just some diagrams of how we developed the facade. This is an unrolled elevation of both the cylinder and the cube. With a series of catenaries and arches to kind of support that cantilever, overlaid with essentially a grid that was an already approved NOA window system. NOA is like the hurricane approval system in Miami Beach. So if it already has an NOA, you save a lot of money because you can use an older kind of testing strategy. So the overlay of those two basically became the facade. Of course, it's a little bit more complicated than just those two things. There's floors, and there's all, everything seeing here green is essentially is vertical circulation. There's ramping, there's floors. So there's a lot of coordination between inside and outside in terms of how the facade interacts with the interior. And I have a few photos that show it's mainly a cast in place structure and this is kind of the ramp coming around the dome that you see beyond. A couple different slides of that, and the relationship to the facade, of course, is also integrated into that relationship. And so here are some of the models of the ramp coming around the dome and looking through the dome that we used to kind of test this idea. And then here's the actual construction, which was not very straightforward. So originally it was supposed to be a cast in place dome that had a roof terrace, had a lot of other functions that had to be abandoned because of the time it took for the concrete to cure and the delays in basically constructing the rest of the building. We had to rethink the dome into a light gauge metal structure, which was interesting because there's a company called Radius Track that does CNC bending. So you could actually make some complex shapes with a high level of accuracy like you see here. But ultimately it was a blessing in disguise because how much infrastructure was needed to be added to the dome between the lighting rails, the strong points, the audio, the speakers, all the integration would have been very difficult in a cast in place structure. So I think in the end, it ended up looking exactly the same. It's still the same kind of a massive look, but it's essentially kind of a hollow freestanding structure. Here's just some of the images of that ramp kind of going behind the dome, looking through the dome. And I just have a few images to show the kind of separation, the programmatic separation between the spaces. So these are kind of these large doors from that could kind of manually slide to basically close out the space. So one of the first exhibits or first shows was by Pam Tanowitz, choreographer that did a kind of a dance recital inside the dome, and we designed this platform to fit into the space for that kind of performance itself. And here's just an image of the opening. You can see the 3 different buildings, the 3 boxes of chocolate, the parking structure, which we're not really talking about the parking structure today, or the historic renovation, but those are the 2 that you see in the distance, and then the final forum is in the foreground. Just a few more images of the forum. This is the courtyard of the historic structure and the precast concrete with automated concrete structure. So this was like the beginning of our company, where I was going to Miami a lot, spending a lot of time, and we had reflected on maybe some things we maybe should have done and didn't do, which was kind of develop and test our own business strategies while we have the stable fee through our collaborations. Would be some advice for those that are collaborating and have some stability. It's good to take advantage of that time a little bit more than maybe we did
At the moment.
at the moment.
We're still kind of trying to do
We're
it.
working on it,
Yeah,
yeah.
we're working on it. So between 2017 and 2020, that was a time of high production locally. We had opportunities to work with local business owners and nonprofit organizations such as PRX, such as the Emerald Necklace Conservancy through Folk by Flow. We also work collaboratively with Runcible Studios, developing Gilman Square, and then we also were working on HYL, which is Health Yoga Life, this project that is near MIT. So we want to talk a little bit about Health Yoga Life. This is the space before, the renovation, obviously. It's a very complicated space. It was in a corner. It had all this mechanical. This is the Novartis building. So it had all this mechanical running through it. It was, basically went from like really tall spaces to like almost like 9 feet areas in some cases. So, working with our client, which we really loves, a family-owned business, and they had a very interesting business models themselves, where they introduce yoga and also learning and mentoring. So we translated basically these 3 main services that they provided into 3 well-defined spatial experiences. And because we work on the forum in Miami, we thought we were going to just keep that name and like add it again to some of the spaces we were doing. So the forum, the studio, and the shop became sort of these 3 anchors for the program. The shop being sort of like the element that links you to the street, the studio, obviously, the yoga studio. And the forum was where the space in between, where you arrive, you take your shoes off, you hang out after, etc. This is the site, that corner. The street presence was extremely important for them, right, to attract people. But also, it's kind of unusual for yoga studio to have a street presence. So we really were interested in that, to capture sort of the energy of the street. Here, that diagram of the 3 circles laid out onto the plan. You kind of see the kind of proportions of spaces. So to stitch the experience and address the issues of privacy and light that comes with having a 16-foot tall curving glass facade, we decided to create this system of wood fins that would unify the back and front, as well as create a cohesive language on the facade. So, as you can imagine, budgets were small and modest. So during the pricing exercise, we tried to figure out ways of building these things. We went through several iterations. In the end, we proposed to the client that we were going to build it ourselves in collaboration with Bill Bancroft, which I'm sure a lot of you know. I know Penn knows Bill. So he let us use his space, and it was instrumental in us being able to pull this off. There was a process that comes with building your own millwork. So we developed that along the way. We also collaborated with the GC that was building the vanilla box, and we were sort of like, as we were developing the fabrication model and schedule, etc. We started fabrication, the site started construction, and we started delivering. We were milling and delivering parts day and night. This is actually before New Year's classic. There was a lot of labeling of parts. This is like almost like building a modeling studio, but big. The fins were super big. They ranged from 3 feet to 16 feet. We rented this little lift, and we had to really coordinate it very carefully not to be in the way of the contractor, right? Now, so we were involved in all moments of the construction of this millwork, from creating the pieces that held the fins up, we punch the holes and then we clean them, we paint them, etc. Very dedicated. Here's some photos of that process. We actually have to like reinforce some of the structure to support the weight of the fins. That was fun. But it was actually extremely robust when all came together. So at some point we had to intersect with the work of the contractor, and that was nerve-wracking, but it worked out. They framed the steps, and we were coming down with this fins, and it really is a perfect match. So we were very happy. And then, you know, the finished work came in, finished, sanded everything. Here's our crew, Bill there, Emma. And this is kind of like the final products and images that we were very lucky to have Bruce Lamonte photograph this. So that was nice. The studio creates a beautiful glow at night, and it feels really pleasant. Here's some final photos of the space.
Since the pandemic, it has been closed, but we have some good news is we just got called by some fitness studio that's renting it.
Hopefully.
So, well, I think hopefully.
Yeah.
They're in negotiation with Novartis to rent it, and they called us to help them kind of hopefully retrofit it to whatever their needs are, but hopefully it doesn't change too much.
The lessons learned here was to get that last payment by building it into the retainer. We're just gonna leave it at that.
It's called the 30% rule.
Yeah,
They're always going to
30% rule.
stiff you for 30% if they can.
No, maybe,
Okay, maybe not.
maybe not, but maybe yes. So we're gonna move on to another project. This is something that you know, it's a typical office renovation project. This time was extremely lucky to work with PRX. PRX, as you know, they do podcasts, but they also do they have a podcast garage, which is a place for community to learn about creating podcasts. So we help them move into their new offices. And for that, we use, you know, it was, again, a very constricted space, light on one side. So we use, you know, models to sort of like mock up the different concepts for the office space. You know, on one hand, they needed an open office for collaboration, for workshops and things like that. And on the other hand, they needed privacy. They needed, you know, a place to make phone calls, etc. You know, and so that was very challenging. So in general, you know, we basically filled in all of the edges, allowing light, the one wall that brought the light in open up, as well as we have light coming from the south. And so how do we, you know, marry those two conditions where we need privacy, but at the same time, we want to let light in? So we explored that through some material experiments, and we created, again, a very do-it-yourself mode, a wall that was made with like Home Depot elements and
Packing
peanuts infills to create a sort of like fuzzy wall that will glow, you know, provide some kind of warmth to the space. And it had zero acoustic properties, as you can imagine. But the point was to create this sort of like static movement and the idea of privacy. And then we had some sort of like rooms and other kind of like elements of the broad like sound privacy. So this was a very fun project, pretty quick project. And again, we also had a chance to mill and build all these components of the entry. So and organizing the entry sequence. And we developed a logo for them through the collaboration with Neon Williams, which are the people who made the Citgo sign. And then, you know, again, very low budget, very much working with the existing space. We couldn't move the ceiling grid and things like that, and just like literally IKEA and, you know, reuse refurbished furniture. So if that, we think it was a collaboration that was successful in the end. But I know, but the lesson learned there was like to sort of start to rethink the do-it-yourself, as this is not a very sustainable thing over time. We're gonna move on to something else. Like at that time, they were also speculating a little bit. So we did a competition for the dry dock. This was to reactivate the Charlestown waterfront. Here's the site right here. I think the thing moved 90 degrees. Here's a section of it, right? Basically, if you don't know what a dry dock is, it's like a giant parking lot for a ship, so they can fix it and they can clean it. And the scale is huge and overpowering. So when we did this competition, this ideas competition, we decided a dry dock could be an excellent place to bring together multiple partners. So we decided this would be an infrastructure for art, for play, for relaxation, where many economies and jobs can kind of like spring out with this clever relationship and partnership. So trying to go a little faster, sorry. So the scale of the dry dock can be extremely intimidating and also can be sublime at the same time. So we started breaking apart the void into these programmable rooms as a strategy, right, to allow to insert specific identity to the different segments of the dock. So we have these 5 components. Of course, there's a forum, a tower, an island, an arena, and a pool, which then again were stitched together into different experiences. The forum will be a public outdoor theater, you know, with a seating area, connects to the dry dock, with the First Street in Charlestown. The plaza becomes a meeting point and a gate to the dry dock. The tower, right here, will hold the elevators and the stairs to go down to the bottom of the dock. And it's also on one side, a climbing wall that is looking towards the water. We developed these connecting and pedestrian bridges to intersect some of these components. Here we're intersecting another one of the rooms to create a shortcut. And essentially trying to create multiple scales of occupation. This is inside what we call the island, which is a garden. And then the floor of the dry dock is this multi-purpose outdoor sort of beach space. The dry dock itself naturally is designed to be flooded. In its empty state, the water edge is held back from First Street and therefore protects the area in the case of a storm surge. But in a flooding event, the dry dock will store the water and then we can use existing pump mechanisms to discharge that water slower in a slowly manner. So we sort of speculated with those ideas what that would do, how that water overflowing could create some sort of like interesting landscape or water, you know, kind of waterfront landscape. And as well, we imagine how it will play out in different seasons. And so here's some winter view, like a frog pond 2.0. And we really love that. We love making, you know, this competition. We love to have more time, spend more time speculating a little bit. So that's good. So with Folk by Flow, it's a collaboration with the Emerald Necklace Conservancy, which is the Emerald Necklace obviously is like this giant system of parks. And we were acting on the Shattuck Center, which is sort of like the entry visitor center of the Emerald Necklace, which is right here. I'm showing in a minute, but in the contextually, we were also working within the makeup of this exhibition called Folk by Flow, which was the work of Fujiko Nakaya, who is an artist that activates landscape spaces with fog, which is incredible. If you don't know her, it's just beautiful. So we were called in to renovate the interior of the Shattuck Center to be a temporary gallery space. But this is the Shattuck. There's like 2 buildings side by side by Richardson. One is an infrastructural pump and the other one is the offices of the Emerald Necklace Conservancy right now. So then again, you know, this the challenge here was how can we transform a office space into a gallery space without moving a single wall and without, you know, in a non-destructive way, working within the layers of a historic building and a newly renovated building by Ambeja. So that was extremely challenging. Something we like to do to solve problems like this is work with models to study different ways in which that can be resolved. So we developed different armatures that could be self-supporting and that could react in a way to the existing architecture. So we came up with this idea of using concavity to simultaneously line the edges and connect the edges, and connect the spaces inside the Shattuck Center, and create different moments and pockets that can be used for exhibition. So here is a model. It's called a model drawing. It's a model that we drew a section on, and it's just kind of like post-production after the project was done, but it kind of shows the two systems coexisting. So we did this mock-up, right, that allow us to work some of the details. And again, we're collaborating with Bill Bancroft through all of this. Here's some close-ups of some of the corners. So this kind of concavities have this very weak moments, which are the corners where the panels meet. So we decided to make that out of solid wood, and then the rest is curved core and an armature of plywood, to tackle that kind of like joint moment, which typically gets kicked and destroyed in a minute in an exhibition situation. So that we decided to really pay attention to this joint. And obviously, because it was lining all kinds of different spaces, it became almost like a collection of these moments where there's all these unique conditions. Sorry, I'm trying to advance, but the computer doesn't want to. There we go. So Jen Mergel curated the content of the exhibition, and Kyle actually designed did all the graphic design for of the content. And the mock-up actually became this very instrumental element to engage us all in this process of putting the exhibition together. So we were able to sort of test real time, different font sizes, test ideas, almost like how the content would kind of to flow. There's John Levine, who's working with us at the time from Northeastern, that helped us fabricate and install the project. So again, one of those do-it-yourself projects. We were able to sort of like mill this, bring it in, install it, and worked while the office of the Emerald Necklace was still operating very much so during the day, and we'll come in late in the afternoon and work off hours. Really love the play of light and shadow that the structure created. Here's the armature sort of like blank without the graphics, and then here it is with Carl's work, which is beautiful. And so to us, the lesson learned here is to nourish these relationships that you have with the people that you have symmetry with. Very much something that we would love to repeat. Along those lines, sorry, I'm going like so many projects. Along those lines, we were working with Roundtable Studios, and we're doing collaborative work to like pursue this development of housing and mixed-use development in Gilman Square. We're working through options for a developer for a really long time. I've done, almost like a couple of years of work. As Somerville was redoing their zoning, we were sort of like adapting to it and proposing ideas. And we're still in the process of getting this project to fruition. So where the developer had to, this is a lesson learned for us. And we actually exploring that world was extremely insightful for us. So you can kind of see we're kind of like evening out, right? Like the work locally starts to even out with the work with the collaborative work from OMA. We ended up doing during the pandemic. It was also a high production moment where we did a lot of residential renovations. As you can imagine, everyone wanted to have a new office space in their house, etc. So we did. We got work from Merge Architects. Actually, I think Kyle, you punted this to us. This is probably one of the smallest projects that we have ever done, and it's also, I would say, even though it's small, it was not easy. Because of it being small, it wasn't, we wanted to do it, build it. It's a 400 square feet apartment that we reconfigured the kitchen that was like initially in this little closet. Our client wanted to feel a little more lofty, so we ended up reconfiguring to this linear kitchen and creating a little pocket of space along the entry for him to put his piano. So this is sort of the result of that. And Joseph was the kindest of clients, and worked with us through all of the difficulties on that time with the delays of material, with the pricing spikes, et cetera, et cetera. So small projects, sometimes more time consuming than big projects. We also did a renovation for a couple in Malden, where they bought this house, a beautiful big house, but it was a mess. And we were able to sort of like reconfigure to, again, feel a little bit more open. This is something that we typically do. Here's photos of the kitchen and upstairs bedroom and some of these blocks that organize the house. So really like find the time and energy, lesson learned to find the time and the energy to document the projects as you to be able to tell the story, because the flip side of working through pandemic is that we just now came back to photograph them and document them. So it's a lot of like work we did that just like got lost almost in like some sort of limbo through those years. Lastly, we're going to show some work we did that's not residential. This is a company called Solve. Solve is childcare learning spaces. And they decided through pandemic years that they wanted to test a storefront model, not just like a standalone. So we work with them to renovate the Getting Shed for Women in Chestnut Hill, which is like this tiny space. And this is like also collaborate here with Kyle Barker on the primary projects for programming and design. In this tiny space, long, skinny storefront space, we decided to play a little with this false perspective. So we incline the ceiling, the sloping ceiling, to create more intimacy at the back and kind of like almost like dissolve the tightness of the scale. And we created this oval oculus that provides lighting and centers you in the room. And some, the kids use it to sort of like gather under, and the light changes at story time. And it's used, in the winter time, like it's dark at 3 p.m. It like really brings warmth and a sense of place to this tiny room. So, lessons learned on this one was don't blur the scope boundaries. We got a little bit of trying, I guess, coming out of a moment of a lot of doing it yourself, and then entering again into a more formal world of construction. We tend to like blur the boundaries and order things that we shouldn't be ordering, and like take on all kinds of scope that really belongs to the GC. So like we learn to keep it separate. Anyway.
All right, I think we're doing good. 33 minutes. We only have a couple more projects. I think we're going to be quicker than we thought. This project was in collaboration with another architect named Robert Stein, who came to us through UTL, actually. This project, and also Robert came with the project because Robert was very good lifelong friends with the owners of this house. So Robert's an architect in and of himself. He's been retired, but he was a joy to work with and collaborate with on this project for his friends, essentially. This is a house that served multiple purposes. This is our first kind of ground up house, although it was an addition. So there's no kitchen, but there is an elevator, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But this is primarily an addition related to pandemic also, since this is still in our pandemic series. It was once a second home at Lake Sunapee that's now being transformed into basically an intergenerational house where the parents are aging and they want to age in place. The children live there and the grandchildren live there. So you can have 3 different generations residing in the same house. And then how did they reside in that house and age gracefully over time was the primary prompt of this addition. I don't have the existing condition drawing here, which I should, but right now, before we did this addition, they did have like a makeshift ramp that kind of went from parking that's on the left of this slide all the way up to the existing house, which is on the right. And so our addition is kind of in between parking and the existing house. And the issue with the ramp, of course, in the winters at Lake Sunapee is the ramp's not always super functional for access. So they wanted to provide, let's say, much more graceful access as they got older to the house itself. So in this image, you'll see a kind of a one-car garage. To the right of that garage is an elevator that basically links all the different levels of the house together vertically. So then they could use an elevator. We also recreated that ramp, which you see kind of on the top of that slide, which you'll see here. So there's still a ramping system to allow for deliveries and kind of walking up to the house when the weather is nice. And then they'll use the elevator and garage kind of when it's not so nice. So it's kind of an interesting project to stitch together this old gambrel structure, which you'll see in a minute, into kind of basically what is essentially is a master suite. It's a master bedroom with some changing, a master bathroom, and then upstairs on the second floor is kind of a loft area, like a reading loft area, then an office for them. They still do some of their kind of telemedical work up at Lake Sunapee, so you needed an office that had some privacy on the second floor. Here are some of the drawings that we did, the kind of intermediate between that gambrel roof structure and this structure. Here's some of the images. So the screen is kind of providing some privacy as you're walking up this ramp, because this is where Amazon comes up, all your deliveries come up this ramp to the front door. So there's some privacy element that we created here. There's also a direct stair for if they want to bypass the kind of the ramp and the sequence to get out, they could go straight down the stair. And then here's that kind of ramp going up to the main front door, the main kitchen. So this is in section kind of looking at, and here's kind of a photograph of the kind of the ramp side of that sequence. You can see the cars on the right where they park. This ramp goes up to basically the kitchen area of the house. Here's kind of a primary section through the living space. There's a large overhang, kind of the porch that gives you the view of Lake Sunapee, which is quite nice. And that's one of the other reasons they wanted to do that is their existing bedroom doesn't have a great view. So they're benefiting from the location and the view that's gained through the addition. And here's kind of an image of that. In the summer, the view, there are a bunch of trees within the 50 feet of the waterfront that they can't touch. That's kind of a state law. But in the winter, it's much more clear. In the summer, it's much more lush, but the water, they could still see the water through the trees. This is kind of the overall space. It ended up being, they were very interested in maintaining some of the qualities of the existing house, but the existing house was essentially all wood. It's been retrofitted to have insulation now, but initially it was just basically a wood clad house inside and outside. And it wanted to maintain some of the same qualities. So this is also basically a Douglas fir clad interior, both kind of roof system and wall systems were all clad in the same Douglas fir. So here's kind of a section through the second floor. This is on the upper right is the office. And here it is as you kind of arrive to the right, you kind of have a view of the woods and the hill that's going up. And then to the left, you have even a better view of the kind of the water from his office. Here's to the right. And then it's all overlooking that master bedroom in terms of interconnecting where his office and where they work and then where they're sleeping. Here's kind of an elevation on the lakeside. And here's kind of the view of that. Now there's other spaces in here, like in this main central space. The very top is the office space. Below that is kind of a reading room where they could sit in the sun. And even below that is a greenhouse where they do a lot of their own gardening, and they do have a lot of seedlings that they wanted this greenhouse to be able to basically start all their seeds for the growing of different types of plants. So the lesson learned on this one was time and materials, never again, even in a pandemic. I think there was a lot of frustration on client and architect side and even builder side because of the contractual relationship of the house was time and material, because no one was really controlling the labor market at the time. The material market was unsure, so no one was wanted to take on any other type of contract up there. And there's very, very sparse number of contractors even willing to take on work within 1 or 2 years at that time. So it was a difficult relationship to get into. It was difficult to go through because of essentially the cost was kind of a little bit out of control and non-controllable because of the contractual relationship. So even if it means waiting a couple of years, I may recommend that any client waits a couple of years if that's how the market is leaning. And then the last one is, while we're doing all this, we got pulled back into OMA to collaborate on another project, which was the Albright Knox Museum in Buffalo. So in 2017, which was overlapping a lot of the project you saw, we were also hired as a consultant to work with OMA to work with them to design and develop the Albright Knox Museum in Buffalo. This ended up being another 6-year commitment. They're both basically 6-year commitments. So we maybe only have a couple more of these in our life. So we started in concept design and ended in 2023 with the reopening of the museum. And for those that are from Buffalo or know about kind of this area of the world, E.B. Green kind of positioned and planned this Albright Knox as part of the Pan American Exposition in 1901. It's that little red kind of dot down there on the lower left. And as a museum in a park, it's actually in a park designed by Olmsted. So it's literally a museum in a park was the original concept of the Albright Knox. You can even see the kind of roads that go around the museum. Like there's a continuity between kind of the green space and the museum itself. Here, just kind of a site view, an aerial view of that. So you originally had a central axis in the middle of the sculpture terrace that was maintained up until Gordon Boonshoft came in the 1960s. And Boonshoft, obviously one of Pritzker is probably Buffalo's most famous architect. I love Boonshoft's work anyway. He was commissioned to create an auditorium and a courtyard addition you see here in this plan. And he kind of did the unthinkable from a preservation point of view in our time, right? Like if I tried to do this scheme today, like they would not let me do it, take away the main central classical axis and put a parking lot, which is what he did. He also reoriented the whole, let's say, the entrance sequence of the museum to no longer be on that axis, but off to the side with the courtyard, which you see here where it says entry, all because of, let's say, the facilitation of parking. And so it's a beautiful addition. You guys have been to this room when all the curtains are open. It's a spectacular room to kind of be in. It was also an interesting courtyard in terms of, it's very similar to the Beinecke Library in terms of kind of the volume and courtyard relationship. But it honestly didn't work for the museum. We got a lot of talking to by Yanni Saran, who's the museum director, on the relationship between these corridors, which were meant to display art, and the number of art incidents, which is essentially every time someone bumps into art, the museum has to document that as art incident. I think it's like 600-something% greater in these two corridors than the rest of the whole museum. So it wasn't functional as art. So the museum initially told us they wanted us to build over the top of this courtyard to basically integrate 1962 Gordon Boonshoft edition and 1905 kind of E.B. Green edition by doing something of a new kind of a lobby that kind of celebrates both facades, which you'll see in a second, in that space in between. One interesting thing is Boonshoft also didn't reconnect to the park. He provided an entrance, but then he didn't provide an exit. So he kind of turned his back to an Olmsted Park as well. I mean, he's a great architect, but there's also something in retrospect you wonder why. So OMA's the first idea was to essentially bring the park through the museum again, kind of restate that idea of a museum in a park by letting Olmsted's Park come through. And there are a number of like collages we do of these kind of classic Central Park bridges. That's the idea of a bridge in a building, kind of bringing the park through that void space. And so here's some early sketches of very sophomoric sketches. The museum's much bigger than that, but let's pretend the museum actually could sit there in one story. But the idea was clear, right? You kind of create this axial relationship between park and also between art. So one direction is art, the other direction is park. It could be a very beautiful idea of, on the right, you can see the 1962 edition by Boonshoft. On the left, you can see these kind of classical columns. So this lobby being kind of the intermediary between these two different eras. And then the third era is above. You can't really see the edition above, but that would be the third iteration of this museum, kind of in this kind of a dialogue. And so went through a lot of studies trying to figure out how do you make that work, did all these like fancy renderings, and then we just got smashed by the preservationist. And so anyone that was following this project probably knows that this happened. We were pretty far along in this idea, and we like the idea from an environmental point of view. It's actually much cheaper to build in a more compact envelope. We think it was a better footprint for the park because we are also burying a parking structure. So then we could bring the park back all the way around. We could restore the axis of the classical building. But man, they basically shut the whole project down through the criticism. And maybe some of that criticism was fair. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying this happened. And I like some of these comments about Shohei are like he's a rank amateurs. He finds it kind of funny, but it did make us rethink the whole project, kind of mid I guess schematic design. And so we went through a number of options, like everybody would, is trying to figure out where this goes. And ultimately we ended up putting the building as far away as we could from the existing structure, while on the property of the Albright Knox. So this ended up being the corner of kind of Elmwood and Iroquois Drive. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is loading still was a challenge in the scheme we were proposing, but by pulling it all the way over here next to Iroquois Drive, we could solve the loading issue a little bit better, because we did end up burying the parking structure. So you see here in front, we reinstated the axial relationship to the Olmsted Park. We reinstated the park in what's called the Great Lawn now. So there's no more parking at all on the site, because it's all beneath it. But we still have the one primary issue was, how do we get art in and out of the museum? Because we basically cut off that with removing the parking structure. So some of the ideas around the actual building itself was kind of art was in this kind of cross cruciform form. All the galleries that we proposed were actually very similar to the classical gallery proportions in terms of height, width, and length. The Albright Knox really liked the proportion of those galleries. The curators wanted to kind of maintain those proportions. So we didn't do any super oversized galleries, except for on the third floor, we created more contemporary art kind of gallery, but the rest of them are pretty classical gallery proportion sizes. This left the corners of the museum open. So the corners became kind of services. One is administration, one is circulation, one is a black box kind of, not a black box theater, black box gallery. And then one is loading. So all the four corners just became functions. So art kind of in one direction now had its own relationship. It's not necessarily related to the kind of classical structure or the 1962 structure anymore, but it is, I guess it has its own relationships now that it's trying to find. And then the other thing was the bridge, which you'll see in the photographs. The bridges basically became the link. It became a link of art path, which kind of meanders around the art. You kind of see a little umbilical cord linking the new edition and the 1905 building. So that umbilical cord was both art path, but also circulation. So you can link the two buildings as well. So it's a, a little bit less than 1 in 20 slope linking between the two buildings to be able to move art from a loading dock through that path and into the classical building. Just kind of overall view, some of the models we're doing. So the actual program became one thing, and then the space in between became something else. And of course, building in Buffalo, there is a climatic issue of how much exterior space you could have. And we spent a lot of time like thinking about Louisiana and Denmark and these ideas of different spatial experiences of kind of the intensity of viewing art, and then the need for some kind of a break or reprieve from that intensity. And that has to do with kind of looking out to the Olmsted Park. So this idea of inside and outside became essentially a promenade, a 360-degree promenade around the art spaces, which are the gallery spaces you see in the middle. So there's a lot of interplay between kind of not necessarily outside, but inside and in the atrium and outside of the gallery. So again, nature and art. So the idea that the nature kind of surrounds the art, but then it's also protected from the winter, so you could use it year round. Here's some of the models from early on of that scheme, and here's the final photo. I skipped a lot of stuff, but we're at the final photo. We got time here. So this is kind of standing on the Great Lawn, looking axial at the museum. On the lower level, of course, is that cross. The promenade goes around around the perimeter. That's why it has that glass facade. Here's the circulation kind of core going up one of those quadrants. This is the black box gallery with the kind of curtain around it in that quadrant. And you can still see what is very interesting that the Albright Knox really liked was that it gave them an interior kind of public facade as well to program art. So in a way, it gave for a different kind of art that could be shown publicly year round. It's protected from the weather, but then it could also be displayed on the actual museum walls, these kind of white walls itself. And this is Robert Urban, which you guys probably know on the foreground. They had I forgot the name of the artist of this big kind of painting, but someone already did a multi-story kind of painting on the north side here. Here's the kind of bridge that's umbilical cord kind of connecting the two, and some of the gallery spaces. This one's a triple high space when you first enter. That's your circulation space. Still circulation space. Here's kind of the link, the start of that bridge. This is where the cafe is, kind of occupying a zone in between kind of gallery and nature. And then some of the most interesting parts for me was some of the artist collaborations that you get exposed to working with such a big international firm. This is Miriam Backstrom, did these really beautiful woven tapestries. She used this like metallic thread and she used VR to try to basically understand the space itself and the arrival. This is arrival from the basement. So it's always kind of interesting. How do you arrive in a basement space to a museum? And this is, if you ever go there, this is how you arrive. You'll arrive in this space. So the artist designed this whole space around the idea of movement, around this kind of round, let's say round form that we gave her. And that movement had to do with just, let's say, the pixelization of these images she had to basically draw your eye kind of in and around these objects, with the object is the elevator in this case. So these tapestries was a very challenging but fun integration of art and architecture, and how we do that and how we interface with the artist and how we work with the artist was a lot of fun. In the end, the museum got their way. The preservationists were most objecting to covering the void of Boonshof. They said the void is just important as the volume, which I probably would agree with in terms of the composition of that space. But Yanni Sarin was determined to close in that void, mainly because of all the issues that they've had with trying to display art there. They wanted to free up that void by basically removing the interior facade. They're able to expand those corridors. So they no longer have this issue of kind of the display of art in those corridors. So they hired Olafur Eliasson to basically cover that courtyard. And they got, I wouldn't say they got around it. Let's say they have the right as an organization to curate their own art. SHPO and state historic preservation boards actually don't ever tell an art museum how they have to curate their art. So if they hire an artist to cover the courtyard, it's no longer in their purview. So they got around covering the void by hiring another artist to basically cover the void. So they're able to essentially get what they want. And they also have this very beautiful space as well. And I do have a view. So this is the 1905 on the right, 1962 is the facade on the left from Boonshof. And in 2023, Olafur did this kind of very beautiful art piece to kind of cover that courtyard. So a couple of last thoughts on that was maybe we need to rethink preservation to adopt a broader vision of what it means to preserve architecture, especially contemporary architecture. I think that's a bigger discussion than what we have time for today. But I do like working with artists and architecture. We got to work with Olafur in terms of collaborating on making that whole space work, and the integration, the detailing of architecture and art was a lot of fun. And then we thought we'd just share with you a few things that are on the boards in the construction. We kind of been trying to get off and wean ourselves off the OMA addiction. So we haven't since 2023, we haven't worked with them. So they kind of fallen off here to the lower right. You know, maybe they'll jump back on one day. I don't know. It is more financially tough. So our first advice of like getting everything in order when things are stable is very good advice for ourselves to follow better next time. But right now we're working on a lot of local projects. We're doing another project for Pudding Stone. So this is for Solvay, sorry, it's called Pudding Stone. For Solvay, so that you saw the one storefront we did. Now we're doing a 5,000 square foot version of their kind of childhood education centers. And so there's a lot of principles that we learned in that small storefront that are now deployed here. And this was like a few weeks ago. I think it's going to open up probably end of this year. So this is kind of under construction. Sorry for the bad construction lighting, but these are some of the spaces we kind of designed and how they're kind of coming through right now under construction. We did a house that's in Arlington that's almost done, just missing some railing and some doors here that it's kind of in the progress of being completed. But this is also a pandemic edition that took way too long. We have a house that's in design right now up in New Hampshire. That's just basically for a house for a family to be able to retreat to. And then lastly, we just got approved a project for Somerville Ave for housing. So it's our first kind of multifamily housing as our own company. We've done it obviously for other companies we work for, but we got a 14-unit building on Somerville Ave, kind of near Porter, that just went through urban design approval that we're very excited to keep working on and develop. But that's still ongoing. We'll see how that ends up. But that's it. We did that in 54 minutes and 49 seconds. Thank you all.
That's great. Thank you for the excellent presentation. I put a note in the chat, but if people have to go, of course, feel free to hop off. I think we're just going to stay probably until about 1:10 for questions. And one just came through in the chat, so maybe we'll start there. Great to see all the exciting work. Love the art and architecture piece. How do you envision incorporating art into architecture through your practice and local greater Boston or New England artists instead of through OMA?
That's a tough question. I hope you're doing well, Liz. She's a former student of ours. I would like to. I mean, we did Fujiko Nakaya was kind of, we were adjacent to Fujiko, and that was also a very fulfilling collaboration. Even though we didn't really interface with her too much like we did with Olafur and Miriam. I think those opportunities are challenging when you're a small practice. I don't think many people are looking to a small practice to kind of solve some of those issues. They're usually much larger budgets, unfortunately. I wish we could. If someone has like an artist network that they want to reach out to us, they should do that.
It's definitely kind of what we would like to do more of. Definitely like with the Emerald Necklace, that was our first taste of it, and you know, thinking in more of the community scale, that could be great.
You're getting lots of love in the chat. I was going to say a question I had is one of your lessons, which I really appreciate the lessons. I wish like we all shared lessons all the time. You said rethink DIY, and it seems like in a lot of the projects, you kind of spoke to this, but I think, you know, if any of you have studied for like the ARE about contracts and all that stuff, there's like these little bells that go up for me where I'm like, oh, that's like a liability risk, or like, oh, that's like, you know, you're dipping into another scope, or, you know, whatever. And so obviously there's like, maybe you can answer the question in whatever way you want, but I guess there's like, there's always the question of like, how do you get compensated when you go into these other kind of domains? And then also like, what are the risks that you take on in doing that? And so would you say that when you think about the future, do you imagine being as kind of hands-on in implementing the work and kind of seeing it, you know, come into the world? Or after doing that a bit, are you like, okay, we're going to try and go to a more traditional practice model?
I think it's a scale question. I think at a smaller scale, there's probably many people on this call that probably have done similar experimentation in terms of getting something built. And a lot of the motivation at a small firm, just starting at a small scale, that's kind of the primary motivation, is having kind of a body of work that you could document and use for more work. So the scary part of that is there's a lot of liability, and you're taking it on and you're not really getting compensated for it. Because most of that work you saw, we didn't necessarily get paid well for it. You know, the client had a budget, we had a vision, the two things didn't align, to be honest. And we kind of pushed it through our labor to be able to get what we want and get what the client wants, but without the client paying for it, to be honest. In some of those, I think PRX is different. PRX paid for most of what we did. They paid us for, but HYL, which was kind of our first one, was a lot of labor of love.
Yeah, but I mean, in a way, it's calculated too, right? Like Paxton is saying, like there is a lot of thinking that goes into that, and there is some sort of return of investment because we develop tools and we develop processes along the way that makes us feel more confident every time we engage with some self-produced piece in our projects, which has, you know, played out in many of the residential projects as well. And we, you know, while we're trying not, you know, we definitely moving on to a place where we want bigger commissions, we want more formal, everything more formal and more control and less risk. But it's in our profession is inherently risky. So, but we're coming to that world with this, you know, portion that we develop for that is extremely helpful, right? So like, if these tools have allowed us to become closer to the production of space, we're better architects because of it. And so that to me is an investment that we have made early on, and it's a risk that we took on, but I think it has paid off in the way that we think and that we, in terms of how we develop our work.
I could follow up with Cadence asked about the insurance. Probably we didn't ask, which would probably be a scary answer if we did ask. I don't know if I'm pretty sure our workers' liability insurance covers us on a job site. I don't know if they found out we were like on a lift and fell or something, like, why are you up on a lift? Maybe the first question. And then I don't know if they would cover it, to be honest with you. I'm not sure. Because I do know there is a general policy for contractors as well that maybe we would be covered under too, like anybody working for a contractor would be covered, but I think there's a gap there that's why I said it's pretty scary. I don't think I would ask the question.
It's so annoying that in the United States you get done with this like beautiful presentation and like many of us are just like, oh, the liability risk. Like the state of healthcare in America. I was also laughing.
They're good. They're good questions. I mean, it's honestly we took the risk. Yeah.
When you said art incidents earlier, I was just thinking like that's such a funny. I love learning new terms.
Yeah.
Like new terms of bureaucracy.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you all about the clients who are willing to go along on the ride. Do you have a way of sort of testing their will before engaging them in the process, or does it happen more organically as you work with them?
It happens pretty organically. I think that we develop, concept with them, right? So it's never like we're trying to impose these ideas. They want this. And so we're trying to figure out how to make it happen together, right? And so it comes up pretty organically in the conversation. Well, there's this possibility of fabricating it and constructing it and like taking that off of this contract. And, so we're sort of like organically stitching it, and figuring it out.
But again, it has to do with scale. If things get a certain scale, we can't do it. I mean, we could do a small scale. We could do the entry of PRX lobby, and that's like doable just because it's so small, but we cannot. We were toying with the idea of doing the Pudding Stone project, which is 5,000 square feet, a ton of millwork. We were literally putting numbers together. We were like, okay, maybe we start a company. We actually just start doing millwork as, let's say, a formal subsidiary of BOS. We could just like have BOS build or whatever you want to call it and make it something formal. But I'm glad we didn't do it in the end. I just see how much work it is for an established millwork company to deliver that scale. They have such a big production. It's just that they're better than we are at it. That's all they do. That's the truth. Like we're good at a small scale, maybe to get something done informally. That's why we call it DIY, but it's not the same skill set as a mill worker.
Yeah, definitely not trying to be, not trying to say that we can do the same type of or level of work as a formal, millwork company, for sure.
Okay. Any other questions?
Good luck, Camilla, on your applications.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. This has inspired a lot of hope for me in my small little future of having my own practice.
Hopefully it doesn't scare you away. It's fun. It's definitely worth it. But it's hard.
Yeah. I think we might all be a little bit crazy if we're here.
Yeah, thanks for that, Camilla. Cadence, I was wondering, did you have another question?
No other question. Just thank you.
Silvia and Paxton, could you just speak really briefly to when you know to say no to a project or when to kind of put the brakes on a little bit and have conversation, is this something we really want to take on? Because there's a temptation just to say yes to everything.
Yeah. I don't think we are there yet. we're not in the phase where we're like
selective.
as much as we wish we were. I mean, I think we have had, candidly speaking, moments within projects where that came up, like, you know, like maybe this is the moment we can't go, you know, move forward, or we can, like, has to change. And like that prompted different dialogues or different, you know, conversations with our client. But not yet. Not yet.
It's a
No.
good question, though, because I do think it's important to have symmetry with whoever you're working with, that we
Yeah.
all want the same thing. Otherwise, you're kind of swimming upstream all the time.
Yeah, I don't think I would recommend that, though. I wouldn't recommend that you say yes to everything. But also we haven't, luckily, I guess, haven't had like, I guess we did say no to somebody once. I don't remember. But
Yeah, I said no to the guy who wanted to do the poke place in HYL.
that's true. See, we did say no. Someone wanted to do a poke place at Health Yoga Life, and we said no. Yes.
Yeah.
That counts.
He was an architect from New Haven, and he was coming in. He didn't have a license in Massachusetts, and then he just asked us if we would basically sign his drawings so he could do the work.
Yeah, that we went with that route. Yeah.
I mean, this may be too personal, so feel free to just say, like, we can talk about it over beer sometime. But a lot of the lessons were like, I would say boiled down to some version of we should have spent more time doing this or that, you know, like being more thoughtful about our business model. I mean, I might be putting words in your mouth. I'm not trying to. Or, you know, working on speculative work or whatever. And I feel like a lot of us probably feel some sense of that, you know, like in our own work, like, oh, I wish I had been more strategic about such and such, or, and so I am curious, I guess, like when I think about your commitments in life and teaching, do you, or, you know, obviously you had the teeter-totter as a kind of analogy throughout the whole presentation of collaborations with OMA and others. Do you, there's like a chicken and an egg thing about if you left teaching to focus on practice, then you would be losing the guaranteed income of teaching, but you would have much more time to practice. So I'm just curious, like, there's not a really super well-defined question in there, but like
we talk about this all the time, Kyle.
Okay.
This is like a number one topic is like the time versus stability. And that's why the teaching is at the fulcrum right now, because I think our life would fall apart if we didn't have it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really a challenging question because I think there's like inherently a very personal fear of where to get work from me personally, that teaching lets me like put off that question a little bit. Like gives us some space where maybe you don't have to take, like Cadence was saying, like maybe you don't take every job because you have something else. And so maybe that allows a little more selectivity in a way, but also it doesn't generate the urgency that maybe we kind of need, like that fire underneath us to actually like act and do something. So we talk about this a lot, like even the OMA or other collaborations are like a crutch sustaining and off, you know, we've been in business for 10 years, but we've been sustained by OMA for 9 of those years. And so this year's been our hardest year financially. I mean, we think we're doing okay, but it's like definitely not like it was when we had like the constant collaboration. So I think those fears are real.
That's a good analogy. Like once that falls off, right, and you technically have more time, because OMA was extremely intense working with them. So well, now you know, the illusion was now there will be more time to like take this on, and it's not quite like that. It's not quite that linear, I would say. Yeah. Also, we love teaching.
No.
And so that's kind of like, again, maybe this is my line, right? But it does, is again, it's an investment for me, you know, and not so much as a drag, you know. It's more like I'm investing something, I'm creating, you know, I'm working towards figuring out my spot there too, your spot there. And so it's a process, right? So like within the time is not a means to an end, the time there. It's a process of discovery too. And that sounds romantic, but it is very real. And for us, maybe like it is about understanding how to strategically blend them, right? To how to be more strategic with our time in academia. That's what we're working towards, right? To becoming more aware of the resources there as well, and take advantage of things, and like all these like little like spaces that are hidden, right? These little like nuggets of spaces hidden in academia that we need to sort of like discover and take advantage of, that could also help us either free up more time or help us more financially build a practice, etc. So it's in the discovery of those interrelationships between the two realms that I think that's where the challenge is for us.
Yeah, thanks for such a thoughtful answer. I was going to say, I think that I'm very, to be clear, I'm very grateful that you both teach, because I want good people teaching, like the future generations of architects. And, you guys have been like stalwart in that over, I mean, I've known you for a while, and, you've taught well before I've known you. So I think Boston is better for it. I was going to say, maybe this is a good spot to leave it. And again, thank you so much for a great presentation. And thank you everyone for coming. This will be recorded and posted online on our webpage. And we'll have our next event the second week of January. So we'd love to see you all there, and enjoy the holidays.
Thank you, everybody.